Hello, friends and fans. Welcome to Liam's Library. Uh, All That You Love Will Be Carried Away by Stephen King. This is a short story I've wanted to talk about for years. I have been talking about it for years, and I also think it's cool that for once we're not doing a horror story. Stephen King's great at not doing a horror story, and, of course, just the other week I did 1408, which is hands down a flat out horror story. So this story is also featured in the short story collection Everything's Eventual. It came out in the early 2000s by Stephen King. Even when I first read this story all those years ago, I was impressed by it. A lot of the times when I read a non-horror Stephen King story, there's something with a lot of heart in it that just makes me remember it, make me think, that's cool, and it always makes me want to tell the naysayers out there that think Stephen King's just writing about boogeymen and vampires and goblins that no, fuck you. He's actually a very serious writer who writes about very serious things and serious characters, and he can do it in short form and long form. So this story, All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. I took a few notes. I'm just going to really sort of tell you how the story makes me feel, how I think it's definitely worth your time to read. It's about a man named Alfred Zimmer, and he's a traveling salesman. He's been a salesman pretty much most of his life, selling all sorts of different things over the years, but let's say for the last 8 years he's been selling frozen dinners. Got his sample cases in the boot of his car, and he goes all over America to do this. We'll just call him Alfie. That's what he refers to himself as in this book. Alfie has mental health issues. It doesn't go right into them, what they are or why. He's married, he's got a daughter. I think he's 44 or 45. And he's been contemplating suicide for quite some time. In this story, however, he's in Nebraska and it's in the middle of a cold, cold winter. Now, as I'm talking to you about this, it is pouring down outside. We're having a really, really stormy couple of days. The rain hasn't stopped. The thunder hasn't stopped. It's quite nice, really. I think it's peaceful. It's very cold and it's just very wet. So what a better time to talk about All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. So we meet Alfie and he's talking about getting a hotel room. Now, because he's been a salesman for years, he knows how to do this. He books ahead. He knows what room you should book because you get the best room if you book one of the rooms at the end of the big, sad rectangle fucking building. Always book in one of the brand name hotels because you won't really get fucked over. And we're just slowly meeting this guy, and the snow is packed, and the wind is blowing. And as he pulls up, he reverses his car and points his headlights towards this farmer's field, which in the glaring snow and the pissing wind, he can see the lights of the farmhouse. And he's just wondering and thinking about what's going on in that farmhouse. The farmer's probably sitting there with his thick socks on watching the news. The wife is probably cooking some home cooked meal. There might be a little kid running around and an older daughter having a bubble bath in a steaming hot bath upstairs, just doing normal family stuff. And he kind of dwells on it, how different his life is to theirs because he's on the road so much. You can tell there's something going on, and then Stephen King writes like this sometimes. He's talking about parking the car, walking past the snack machine and going to his room. And then it just says in a sentence, the room that he's going to kill himself in tonight. And then just kind of moves on with Alfie's night. So it doesn't dwell on the fact that we've just been told our main character is going to commit suicide tonight. He gets into the room and he's having thoughts about, this is the 10,000th fucking hotel room that he's been in that's just like this. He'll know what picture's going to be on the wall. He'll know what the room will look like. He'll know what it'll smell like. This is his life. And he gets his gun out and he sits on his bed, and it's a 38. I don't know anything about guns. I've told you that 100 times, but it's a 38. He checks that it's fully loaded and he sits there thinking, but then he gets out a notebook And it explains that he's had this notebook for about 7 years. And because he's on the road all the time, what Alfie does is, over the years, he's noticed graffiti on the side of payphones, in public bathrooms, in public toilets and restrooms, because you're on the road all the time. That's kind of where you have to stop to do your business and go to the bathroom and have your lunch and stuff like that. So he's just constantly looking at this graffiti. And he notices, like we all do, just the random stuff that you see in bathrooms and toilets and next to payphones and on graffiti shitty walls. There's heaps of racist stuff. There's heaps of homophobic stuff. And every now and then you'll see something that you haven't read before. There's so much shit that's repeated. It's like, yeah, creepy, fucking, fuck you, fuck your mother, fucking all this horrible shit. But then there's every now and then you'll get something, that he'll read something he's never read before. And he wonders who wrote that and why and what mindset they might have been in when they wrote that. So he starts keeping this spiral notebook and starts jotting down the ones that he thinks are interesting. And he always planned to maybe write a book about it. What's the title he was going to use? Don't Look Up, You'll Piss on Your Shoes, or something like that. And then he thinks, well, you'll never get published if you call a book that. And he seems like a really normal guy. He does keep mentioning the amount of pills that he's got on his person, in his suitcase, and in his glove box in the car. And they're not, they're to try to make you happy pills. So he's obviously had mental health issues for a long time. But on this particular day, excuse me, he's stopped at a restroom, let's say a couple of hours earlier before he's come to this motel, and he's read two things on the wall. One of them is save Russian Jews and win valuable prizes, whatever. The other one is all that you love will be carried away. And he jots those last two in the last page of his notebook. And he sits there and he's thinking about all the things he's seen. In Arkansas, somebody wrote this. I had to take just a couple of notes because some of them are interesting and some of them are terrible. It's like, I suck Jim Morrison's cock. Albert Gore is my favorite whore. Elvis killed Big Pussy. My mother made me a whore. Relax, it's just the rinse cycle. All these places, all these quotes written by different people all over the country. And he'll put the quote and he'll put, the state and the suburb wherever he was at the time that he read it. And he's been filling this notebook up for 7 years with stuff like this. And he likes the idea of the mystery, of the fact that he doesn't want to know exactly what that person meant by it. He thinks that would lose its mystique to some of these things, and it would they would lose their power if he actually knew too much about what that person really meant when he was saying it, or her. And this fits in with his mental state, but it's a very mild story. But what I like about this is the prose. The prose is written fantastic. So the first sentence, describes him pulling up his car in a motel. It describes the storm. It describes the snow. It describes the farmhouse. It does it in about 2 or 3 sentences. And you can tell King was really happy with the way this was pouring out onto paper. I'm a writer myself, and a lot of the times you're just choking on the words, and it's never going to be fantastic. Sometimes you come out and it's like, wow, man, this thing is just writing itself. You can tell he had fun writing this, but he really cares about this Alfie guy, this character that we're reading about. I care for him, and I think the reason that I care for this guy who's about to kill himself is because Stephen King cares about this character, and even kind of mentions that we should probably all spare a thought and give a shit about the Alfred Zimmers of the world, because there's a lot of them out there, and they need help, and we should help them. But he's sitting there with his gun, and he puts the barrel in his mouth, and then he looks at the notebook, and it's open to the last page, and he thinks, well, I'm going to blow my brains out, and somebody's, a policeman's going to come in here and have a look at the last 2 writings. And as soon as he reads, save Russian Jews and win valuable prizes, he's going to think I'm a lunatic, and that's why I killed myself. And maybe his wife's friends and family will be like, oh, well, shit, lucky he didn't come home and just shoot her, because fucking the guy was obviously nuts when they find this notebook that he's been keeping. And then they'll read the last sentence, all that you love will be carried away. And he thinks, well, that actually does sound like a suicide note. But then if they flip through the book, it's all, and you know, Elvis killed Big Pussy and fucking all this crazy shit. He's going to look like a lunatic. And shit, maybe he is a lunatic, but not the way that he thinks they might view him as a lunatic. He knows he's got mental health problems, but he doesn't think he's crazy. He just needs to end it. He doesn't want to live anymore. As is his right. But, so he's thinking, well, what do I do with this book then? Do I burn it? That'll set off the smoke detector. Do I flush it down the toilet? It's like, no, because he can just picture himself digging around in the toilet bowl, fucking with the fan clanking around at the top and the fucking air conditioner going off, blowing hot air, and just how uncomfortable and shitty that would be. That would be a waste of time. Not to mention, he just kind of feels a bit connected to it, like he doesn't want to get rid of it. And he's thinking to himself, well, come on, man, like, it doesn't matter. You're going to die anyway, who gives a shit? He does care. It's like hanging on to one last little thing, which King mentions in this book. It's like breathing. We do things because we want to do them, and sometimes we do things because we need to do them. Like breathing, like fucking, like smiling, like frowning. So he decides, and this is where it kind of changes a little bit. He decides to walk out into the snow and take his book with him and throw it out into the pissing blizzard, so that by the time they find his body and ship his body back home to his wife to get buried, this book will have been covered by meters and meters of snow, and maybe the next summer a farmer will just plow it under his fucking tractor, and it will just go back into the nature and the natural course of things. So that's his plan. He takes his gun with him, and he takes the book with him, and then he starts walking through the snow towards this farmhouse in the middle of this field, this snow-covered field. And every time he pitches the book back to throw it, he can't let go of it. He just can't let go. And he's like, you know, I guess this is human nature, you know, you don't want to let go of things, fair enough. But he's like, fuck, come on, like, you know, like, I just can't let go of this. He tries 2 or 3 times. And then he sees the lights flicker in the distance as the storm and the snow really passes across the farmhouse that he's been looking at. And then it blacks out because of the blizzard. And he thinks, you know what, I'm going to count to 60. And when I get to 60, if the lights of the farmhouse haven't shone through the blizzard, or no, if the lights shine through the blizzard and they come on in the next 60 seconds, then I'm going to actually write the book, and I'm gonna try to live. If they don't come on, I'm gonna go back to my room and I'm gonna blow my brains out. So he starts counting to 60, and he starts to count very slowly as he looks through the storm at the farmhouse that's disappeared, waiting for the light either to come on or to not come on at all. And he waits for the wind to drop. The end. And that's it. We don't know if Alfie goes back to the hotel room and blows his brains out. We don't know if, you know, if he decided to live and write the book. I kind of hope he does. You know, I kind of hope he sees the lights and decides to maybe just give it another fucking couple of years and see how things go. So, you know, depression's a real thing. Circumstantial depression is also a real thing. So that's it. And I've always wanted to talk about All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. I think the title is beautiful. I think, you know, if you're going to write a story, you should give a fuck about your character. I think if you're going to write a beautiful story, you should care about your prose and try to make it as poetic and cool as possible, which this story does. It's very short. And, you know, the ending is very ambiguous, which I'm okay with. I hadn't read this for years, even though I've always wanted to review it, but I used to read it over and over, you know, in my 20s when I was younger. And I used to always just kind of have an idea, well, when I was going to review it this time, I was like, I'm pretty sure he's out there, and like it implies that he's going to kill himself. Reading it this time, I think it implies that he doesn't kill himself. I think even though it's, you know, a very ambiguous ending, I think we might be able to take from it that no, that he does decide to live. So that's it. Sorry if that was a bit depressing, but it's a really, really, really beautiful story. And if you just want to read something nice, well written, you know, and about mental health. Yeah, pick up All That You Love Will Be Carried Away by Stephen King. It's never been made into a movie. I don't know how they would do that. Maybe a short film. It's definitely not horror. It's definitely a beautiful, beautiful story. All right, I'll leave you there, and I'll see you next time. Please read some great books, watch some even better fucking movies, and never, ever once in your life ever take any shit from anybody. See ya.